Chapter 5, Ancient India. Section 1, Geography and Hinduism. We're going to start with the physical geography of India. And we'll start with India being something called a subcontinent. A subcontinent is a large landmass that is part of a continent but considered a separate region. So when we're talking about this particular subcontinent, that's the Indian subcontinent, but it is part of the bigger Asia that goes all over this way. But it's a separate kind of region. The Indian subcontinent includes the countries of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and the island of Sri Lanka. That is the Indian subcontinent. Two mountain ranges separate India from the rest of the continent of Asia. You have the massive Himalayas, which is this area right here. It's the tallest mountains in the world. You actually will find Mount Everest somewhere around right there. And you have the Hindu Kush, which is over here in this area. Three major rivers gave fertile soil to India and allowed for irrigation. First one we have is the Ganges, which starts up in the Himalayas and kind of winds around down here and dumps out right there. Then you have the Indus River, which starts up here in the Hindu Kush Himalaya area and empties out right here. And then you have the Saraswati, which is no longer around. We'll talk more about that, but the Saraswati was kind of right here and emptied out there. So those are the three major rivers. The subcontinent is surrounded by massive bodies of water. You have the Bay of Bengal over here. You have the Arabian Sea over here. And you have the Indian Ocean, which is basically all of this. Winds blow into the continent. But these massive mountains over here kind of block this air from moving any further north. So the mountains kind of act as a barrier and keeping the warm air in India for the most part. So India will always be warm because of these mountains blocking that air from leaving. You also, these winds that blow across the continent or the subcontinent is called monsoons, and they can produce a wet season or a dry season. So if the winds are coming off of the Indian Ocean, they're bringing the wet air with them over India. So you will have the wet season or the wet monsoons. These are called the summer monsoons. So they will come across and bring water and drop it on, and it's very rainy. Now sometimes the winds will blow off of India out into the ocean, and in that case, you're taking the wet weather and taking it back out into the ocean, leaving India dry. Those are the dry seasons, or the winter monsoons. So the summer monsoons bring the rain. The winter monsoons make it dry. Civilization developed along the Indus River. So here's the Indus River right here. It's a major river, just like all the civilizations we've talked about in the past, with Mesopotamia and the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. You have the Nile River in Egypt, the Jordan River in Israel. Now we have the Indus River for this area. And you will see major cities popping up, obviously, along this major river because that's the center of civilization. Two major cities that will develop will be Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. In this picture right here that you see on the right, this is an overhead view of the remains of the city of Mohenjo-Daro. As you can tell from this picture, it's a planned city. So you see designs, you can see roads and cross traffic possibly. It's a designed city, which you didn't really see in other civilizations. But this civilization became known as the Harappan civilization. But you look at the map, here's Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, some other cities that were located on the Indus River. Harappan culture. The early culture had an early writing, and those early writings used pictographs just like the Mesopotamians and Egyptians had done. We don't know much about religion. It seems that the early religion centered around the bull, but there were no known gods that we know of. So as you see in this picture right here, the bull will be kind of standard in a lot of of the early pictures of their religion. We do know that the Harappan culture was widespread and it was very prosperous, meaning they grew and were successful. They had a standard weights and measures. What that means is that everybody in the culture practiced the same way of weighing things and measuring things. That's the standard part. Everything was the same throughout the Harappan culture. They also were using seals, not the seals, but the seals that are stamps. They were used to identify merchants' goods. These are some examples right here of stamps that were discovered that a merchant might use to identify his goods. The Indus Valley culture ends. That many scientists believe an earthquake ended this culture, and floods. And because of this earthquake, it changed the course of rivers, which meant flooding changed as well. The Saraswati, which you see on this line right here, it dried up. Whatever the earthquake did made the water disappear out of the Saraswati, so that river no longer is in existence. But the Indus had changed course through earthquakes, and the flooding will affect those because the river had changed course, and now it's flooding in places maybe where it didn't flood prior. But it did dry out the land where cities were located, and so a lot of these cities will end up leaving as well. For example, Mohenjo-Daro disappears. Who knows what actually happened, but probably due to the earthquake and the river drying up, many of the people in Mohenjo-Daro moved somewhere else because, like we've been talking about, water is very important. A new group is going to move into the area in around 1500 BC. It's called the Aryans. The Aryans were a nomadic group of Indo-Europeans who migrated to the Indian subcontinent on chariots, and they will blend with the local people, which were eventually called Dravidians. So they'll blend their religion and their language with this group of people. So if you're looking at the map here, the Aryans came from up in this area, and they traveled down into the Indian subcontinent. Again, blending with the Dravidians to create a new type of religion and a language called Sanskrit. Once the Aryans and the Dravidians kind of blended, changes are going to occur to Indians in this subcontinent. A social class system develops, and it becomes something called a caste system. A caste system is a certain class a person belongs to by birth. And you can kind of see from this diagram right here what the castes are. Each level is a caste. Okay, so at the very top, you have the priests. They're called Brahmins. Right below the priests are the Kshatriya, which are the rulers, warriors, and nobles. Then you have the Vaishya, who are the artisans and merchants. The Sudra, who are the farm workers, laborers, and servants. And at the very bottom, you have the untouchables. And these are people who did the jobs that no one really wanted. They're kind of the low of the low, the dirt of the dirt, if you will. Now, what this means is that, let's say, for example, you were born to a farm worker in the Sudra class. That means if your parents were Sudra, you were Sudra, so you're born into that particular caste. You also can only associate and identify or have a relationship with someone from the same class as well. So Sudra had to marry Sudra. You didn't see Sudra marrying Kshatriya people. You were part of that class and you were kind of stuck in that particular class until you died. And in their religious beliefs, they would come back in another life. And if they led a good life prior, then they get to advance possibly in their next life. Brahmanism was like the early form of religion of the Aryans, and they worshiped many different nature deities. A deity is a god. Rituals and hymns were found in ancient texts called the Vedas, which you see here, the Mahabharata, which is right here, and the Bhagavad Gita, right here. Those are three ancient texts of the early Indian religion. What we're going to see here is a creation of a new religion called Hinduism. Hinduism really doesn't have a founder, so you can't say like with Christianity that Jesus Christ is the founder, or with Islam, you have Muhammad, who kind of founded the religion. Hinduism really doesn't have a founder. It's just a creation of the early Brahmanism that formed between the Dravidians and the Aryans. Under Hinduism, you have three important gods, and there's a whole bunch of other ones. So you have Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the protector, and Shiva, the destroyer. This is Brahma right here. This is Vishnu, and this is Shiva. Hindus also believe in something called reincarnation, which means that each person has many lives. So you live your life, you pass on to the next life, you move on to a new life, and hopefully it's better than the one you just lived. So that's kind of where the caste system comes into play. So if you were a Sudra in one life and you lived a really good life and you did all you're supposed to do, in your next life, who knows, you might be a Kshatriya. What a person does in each life determines what he or she will be in the next life. This is called karma. You've kind of probably heard the word karma before, as whatever you do might come back to you later on. It's kind of the idea. So whatever you do in this life, for the Indians, if you do well, you will do better in your next life. If you don't do well in this life, who knows, you might go into a lower caste the next time. Hindus believe they connect with God by following their own individual path and carrying out their own assigned duties in life. And if you follow all those, you will be promoted in the next life. Hindus have two ways to achieve closeness with God: meditation and yoga. These are all things that a lot of Americans are familiar with today, especially the whole meditation and yoga idea. That's where we get it from the Indians. That is the end of section 1.